Just while I have you, because you were in the air with the gimbal video. I've done a lot of analysis videos on the gimbal. The main argument, basically, with Mick West is that it's far away. It's an object far away, and then I tried to show, or I believe I showed, using two different methods. Geometrically, just how we draw up. As we're taught to draw up fighter engagements, and then I flew it in DCS. That this object would be less than 10 miles away. It's kind of what I determined. And that being the case now, whether it is some sort of weird, electro-optical spinning glare system inside the targeting pod, it still doesn't look like it. I can't identify it, so I'm unable to identify the gimbal. And so I just want to get your take. I think it's just an amazing video we have to kind of run through. I have the video kind of set up. If we could just kind of talk through, if I can get you to think back to that day. Chris Lado, welcome to Lado Files.
Pretty much every time a air wing, operates, there's foreign activity around us. That's just kind of a given, essentially, although we were briefed on specifics, or we do get briefed on specifics. Like I said, we went to do our workup cycle. We got in the boat, Virginia Beach. We cruised down and started doing operations. The objects were down there as well. And when I say objects, I mean the similar kind of sporadically spaced objects that we were seeing in the Whiskey 72 areas. Go out and do a number of air-to-air training missions, all sorts of different types. If memory serves me, this was an air-to-air mission. And they went out, so kind of guys on each side, pretending to be the bad guys, pretending to be the good guys, not pretending to be the good guys. So anyway, as you know, you all go out there at the same time, more or less. And then as you essentially hit your fuel limitations, you start to head back. And in the Navy, that happens a little bit different than the Air Force, because in the Navy, we have to land at a very specific time. The boat opens at a specific time. And so we operate tactically, and we keep ourselves on what's called a fuel ladder. And it's basically broken down from 15 to perhaps 5-minute intervals of what our fuel rate should be, our fuel numbers should be, based off of our estimated burn for how tactical we're going to be and things of that nature. We have to get pretty anal about it. So
yeah, it makes sense. Same with the large force exercises, because we could only, on a single runway, we could only land two, you have a certain amount of aircraft you can land at a time. It was a big limit for our exercise.
Yeah. So when you're on a boat, you're always dealing with that kind of constraint. And so when you're done, like you're doing your air to combat, like, oh, I reached my ladder numbers, time to throttle back, come out, no more burner, out of mill. And then you're hanging back at a max endurance, Mach number.
So that's your max. It's usually a lower speed. It's not a fighting speed. It gives you your max time in the air.
To hang out, waiting for the boat to open up, right? So that's how we do our math up there, essentially. And so people run out of gas on their own pace, and they, crawl back to the boat slowly. And it doesn't matter where you go, as long as you can get back in time, as long as you're at that slow airspeed, right? So the air crew in question here, at the part of the flight, when they, were low on gas, brought themselves back to essentially the max endurance. And while they were heading, in the vicinity of the boat, they picked up radar contacts that they weren't expecting to see, that had some interesting characteristics, such as a formation of objects, but we'll get to that in a moment. And so they went to investigate. It was strange because the objects were coming from the east of the boat, which were pretty far out there. And what they do typically is we'll have people that launch from the shore in older aircraft, like turbojet aircraft and old fighters, and they try to penetrate the boat's airspace, essentially, like a big war game. Right? And so we'll intercept. If we're in a training mission, we'll have to still have situational awareness that that's going on, and either knock off the fight or let the boat know. But typically, there's people like doing that job exclusively. But either way, so that's kind of part of the game. And when they saw these radar contacts, you're like, oh, maybe this is something. So they still have to maintain the max E. They can't just run out of gas. So they kind of just creep over there and, go intercept it slowly. But these objects were going pretty slow, if I recall, 150-ish knots. And as the object was essentially, I'll just say, oh, my camera's reversed, but left to right.
I hope you're enjoying this interview. My channel runs solely through YouTube views, and the generous support of patrons. So please consider smashing that like button if you do like this video, and then it helps me dial in, get you the best content possible. And if you want backstage access, along with early access to these videos and no ads, support the channel at patreon.com/Chris Lado for only $5 a month. Get all those benefits. In the end, no, thanks just for being here. You make the channel a success. Let's get back to the interview.
So the object's proceeding essentially left or right. They intercepted the object. They stern convert, which essentially means they're going to basically try to end up behind that vehicle based off of its direction from wherever they are. So they're trying to stern convert this object, which is proceeding, you know, essentially on the east side of the aircraft carrier. It's proceeding more or less kind of tangential to, you know, the radius of the circle of the boat. So it's not coming at the boat, but it's kind of like going near it. It has a near point to the boat, but it's not coming that close essentially. And so they intercept these objects, essentially just maneuvering their aircraft to try to end up behind the objects. And that's essentially the best way to keep yourself in a consistent position. And they got to about 4 to 6 miles is, you know, literally what the air crew told me. And that was as close as they wanted to get because it was dark. They could not see the objects, and they're not going to just fly up to, wasn't just one object, but it was one object plus this other kind of fleet of objects. And so what we see on the gimbal video is the gimbal object, which I represent. I represent in that last image you were showing as that circle with the line in it. So that's that circle with the line in it kind of represents the gimbal object. And the fleet of objects, I can't remember, it was like 4 to 6, but it was somewhere in that, and they were in that V-shaped formation, right? And I'm reciting this from the situational awareness page, which is our God's eye view. And you hear the pilot say, "Hey, look at that SA page." He's not saying ASA page, he's saying the SA page, which is the situational awareness page, which is, you know, SOP statements that we say all the time. And so we're looking at a God's eye view, and that's where you can see all the radar data that's combined, and that's where you see the fleet of objects. And those objects, again, kind of proceeding left to right. This shows that direction. So the aircraft would essentially be where your mouse is, more or less. The F18 is where your mouse is, more or less, just in that general direction, essentially.
Yeah.
And so the objects turned away from the F18, the formation. It was kind of a jumbled turn and still pretty tight. You know, it's not like seeing like a wedge where people coming to the inside of the turn, you know, how you would expect that with fighters or something like that. They jumbled up, but not in a manner like coming to the inside of the turn. Like some of them kind of went to the outside turn, which is very jumbled. And they, you know, it was very tight. And then they immediately proceed in the opposite direction. And the gimbal object, which is, this drawing is not completely accurate because the gimbal was more offset away from the echelon, but it was trailing it. But, you know, it, according to the SA page, was just proceeding in that line and then just bounced in the other direction, essentially. And again, that's a God's eye view. So from our interpretation at that point, it just, you know, essentially stopped going in that direction and proceeded in the opposite direction, the trail, the formation there. And at that time, I didn't have situational awareness to the fact that it climbed. My understanding of it performing a climb to make that bouncing maneuver and making a vertical climb comes from a reconstruction that was done later of the flight path that actually demonstrated the climb. Because at the time, you know, when we look at our tapes, you know, maybe it's just me, I'm a bad pilot, but, you know, I'm kind of more focused on the horizontal radar aspect than the vertical one. So, you know, that, you know, I wasn't looking at the vertical radar indicator. But on the situational awareness page, again, it looked flat because that's just what we see. And on the radar page, excuse me, we didn't have the radar page up. It was just the FLIR. So you see what you see.
So then this accelerated, climbed. I guess I didn't know that the gimbal climbed. And then
yeah. So I've seen reconstructions that have had a model, and what that model shows is that the reason it bounced like that was because the object actually climbed about 300 to 500 feet. I forget the exact number. Climbed and did a vertical turn to proceed in the opposite direction. And that model is the same model. I think Mick West actually created that model. And the model shows a flight path, and the variable that is in that model is how far away the object is from the aircraft that's observing it. If it's very far away, it's basically a flat line. If it's close, under 10 miles, it's essentially a J hook. vertical, flight path. And so,
Yeah, as you draw it, yeah, when we draw fights, as soon as someone goes straight vertical, it's just a line.
yeah.
You gotta go. You gotta go
So,
to the
that's where I
side view.
it was actually Mick's assessment of and his model that showed me that it climbed slightly. It's just, Mick's flaw in his assessment is that he disregards all pilot testimony in this, which is very clear that this object is within 10 miles of the aircraft that observed it, not 30 miles, so.
Yeah, and I thought I proved it using geometry. You can't argue with geometry.